Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, what was the better reveal during the Manning cast episode tonight? Was it the roulette story, or was it the story about having to go into the showers to talk with the receivers because Peyton was convinced that his locker was bugged?
It's got to be that one, because he's like accusing another team, which, you know, the coach still exists, right? He's still the coach of the Patriots.
Yep. Another
team of like severely violating NFL rules. That's way better. Like the roulette story is good, well told, it's funny. Someone asked me to like recap the story, and I was like, no, the storytelling is part of it.
If you want to hear the roulette story, just search Pat McAfee roulette story. He's told it on the show before. There's a clip of it out there that exists.
Yeah, so just let him tell it. He's a better storyteller. Plus, like the story being told from his perspective has its own value. So that's fine. But like the act, like, and Manning did it nonchalantly too. He was just like, yeah, you know, when the Pats were in Indianapolis for the Super Bowl, I had to make sure that that after that, you know, we had all of our, you know, visits in the showers, you know, 7 guys in a shower, just talking about plays, because, you know, hot mic. It's just like, and he like never walked it back.
Nope, never once. Not even like, and you can tell he was only half joking. Like this was something he might have actually considered doing. So
yeah, like I don't like. It's kind of funny because like Florio puts, I mean, it's Florio, right? But like PFT puts out like Manning wasn't joking as an article, but in the art, like, and that's the headline, and so everyone reacts to the headline like they're like "F you, dude." But like in the article, he's like, not that Manning is right, he's probably wrong, but you know, a lot of players suspect this, so I'm pretty sure he's not joking, which is like a way more reasonable take than like the way that headline is perceived, right?
It was still quite entertaining. Between that and Eli declaring that openly that he was going into bars underage, and
and that Favre was willing to violate like state liquor laws to. It was perfect.
Yeah, this was another great one that was quite enjoyable. If you haven't checked out the Monday Night Football simulcast with the Manning brothers, it's 100% worth it. It is quite entertaining, and quite frankly, I feel like makes the game go by faster. And because they brought McAfee on in the fourth quarter, made it something that like made you want to stick around for, even though the game was turning into a blowout.
Perfect blow loss material, right? Like it's exactly like the fourth quarter of a preseason game. No one wants to be there, so they just start talking about other stuff, right?
Yeah,
this is exactly what they did. This is when, you know, he told the roulette story, right? This is what. Dude, also, by the way, Eli is messy. He wants to cause drama. He like keeps on asking questions that are like, if you answer them in just the wrong way, it'll blow everything up, right? Like Eli being like, hey, Pat, you know Peyton hates kickers and punters, right? Which is obviously a reference to when Peyton ran Van Der Echt out of the Colts organization by calling him an idiot kicker. Like, that's obviously what that is. Like, Eli, come on, man.
Yeah, I like how in the brother dynamic here, basically, Peyton is Thor and Eli is Loki. Like it's clear that Eli is just an agent of chaos.
Yeah, as a younger brother myself, I get it. Yeah,
like fair. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So,
yeah.
It's great.
That's pretty great. All right. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are doing well. We have a game to talk about. We are going to review the Cardinals. We're going to review the Cardinals game. It didn't end the way that Well, it ended the way a lot of us thought it was going to end, but it doesn't mean that it was right or okay. And we're going to get into that in a sec. Also, we have a great mailbag to go through as well. But first off, just want to thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. Again, hope you guys are doing well. If you enjoy the show and would like to financially support the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code and donate to the show for $3.50 per month. You get access to bonus materials and a bunch of other stuff. Included in this episode for the Patreon people is the bonus episode, or one of the bonus episodes you guys are getting this week. So hope you guys enjoy that as well. It's a couple of pre-show things and mid-show things from the beginning half of this month. So hope you guys enjoy that. Also, you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code as well and check us out there. That's a one-time donation. Or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and go and purchase one of the shirts, one of the onesies, one of the masks, or whatever that you decide that you need for your home and your existence. Arif, I sent you one of the newest models of the Norse Code material out there. There's an action shot of a child in a baby onesie. Out of respect for the child and the parent's family, I'm not posting it online, but we do have action shots of the Norse Code merchandise, in fact, being used on an infant. So,
yeah, it's don't use this against me, but it is adorable. That's so cute. Holy crap.
So thank you so much for sending that in. Really do appreciate it. It did get to us. It did end up getting to Arif, and it partially melted Arif's icy cold heart. So just letting you know that thank you there. Also, speaking of the logo and from the draw play, I have heard a rumor that Norse Code may or may not be included in this next draw play. So,
which would be wild.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear, or I say excited to hear.
So that part is like conjecture, maybe rumor. It seems to be fact that I'm going to die in the comic, not in real. Well, I don't know about real life. Who knows? Life is chaos. But in the comic, I'm going to be dying. Which I guess if I die in real life, that's just going to look like it's in poor taste. So,
I mean, if you die in real life, do you die in the comic? Is that right, what we're dealing with?
Yeah, it's like all the video game movies.
Oh yeah, and between that and Inception, yeah. But check out the draw play this week. I believe it posts on Wednesday. I have heard rumors that it is going to be Vikings themed, and Arif may be in peril. So check that out. Hope you guys enjoy it. And let's get into the show itself, because we have a wailing wall. We usually get these once a year. We get something terrible happens during the game, and as a result, we need to just kind of let it all out. And so I posted on Twitter, hey, send out your best screaming into the ether, into the void. Let us know what you got. And this is what we have, because this game came down to a missed kick, because it's a Vikings game, and of course it ends up going into a missed kick after Kirk Cousins performs some magic. So here's what we got. Natalie just starts us off with why. Fair. Damian Barrett, can Arif ask Zimmer if the next time the team is driving past a funeral that maybe they could stop?
Okay, by the way, so since recording that, in Irish football podcast picked up that we talked about it. I obviously got a number of details wrong because I skimmed like half of 2 Guardian articles. But also I learned some context of it. Like, this seems like way more interesting now that I got which is just like shoddy journalism from the Guardian, how far they've fallen. So the funeral procession outside said that they was outside, and they were acting boisterously and disrespectful. So that's critical, is that they passed by the actual funeral procession, not just like a funeral, which is kind of how it felt like it sounded. And that I think is bad juju in the United States as well. You can't pass a funeral procession, right? So there's that. And then also they the way their losses have occurred are just nuts. There's a tweet detailing them. And the more detail I get, the more interesting it is. So I'm kind of changing my mind on how lame this curse is. So that I'm going to put that one up there. And now that is back in contention to be curse worthy, then we can start talking about, because maybe maybe the team did drive past a funeral. That would explain why their like flights got delayed on the way back.
Flights got delayed. Power went out at.
Yeah, the power went out. I totally forgot about that. Oh man, yeah, we're on track here.
Yeah, we've got something going here. Kyle Slaby asks, did someone hex the moon, or do we need to re-hex the moon to make it stop?
Okay, when all you've got is a nail, or when all you've got a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? I feel like because we've understood hexing the moon as like a progenitor of great events, that now that's the only way we know how to interact with like the moon, I guess. I don't know how to put it. No, we don't need to hex the moon or re-hex the moon. If someone has hexed the moon, we should actually unhex. Like we can't, like you can't. That's like you keep turning the wrench, right? That's like dig up, right? Like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
No, leave the moon alone. That the moon is causing so many more problems, and is the subject of a feature film that we're going to have to watch, huh?
Probably, yes. Ian Pauley asks, or proclaims, what's Case Cookus's leg like?
Famously injured. Like, the reason he didn't, like, get drafted. He had, like, 3 injuries in Northern Arizona.
Ouch. Also, Michael Lacoste asks, given that Case Cookus was built to quarterback and Ben DiNucci was built to play football, I similarly wonder what Ben DiNucci's leg is like and what the asking price would be.
Dude just loves to play the game. If it wasn't for NFLPA rules, God bless them, he'd play for free. He'd kick for free, man. It's Ben DiNucci. What can you say? The guy transferred from Pitt to play at James Madison because he just loves football. He would run the post route in a dagger concept for the love of the game.
Did you see that his cameos are less than $50? His cameo videos are now $35. That shows what a gentleman he is.
Wow, that's magnanimous.
Yep, that might be something we have to do later this year. Bishop Sycamore alumnus asks, is this what we all deserve for rooting for / suffering from a fantasy league dedicated to the mystery that is kicking? You do not bring this league in here with bad energy. No, this league is...
I get it, but you've got it reversed. The league is a response.
It really is.
Yeah, you can't put it on the league. The league exists because of this extant problem. The league is certainly not perpetuating it, right? Like, I mean, people who have never even heard of the league knew that he was going to miss that kick.
Yeah,
so.
Obviously. Let's go to Raul, who asks, are we in the 5th stage of dying yet?
Raul asked like the earlier question, like 3 episodes ago, about like the stages of grief or the stages of dying.
Yep.
I don't remember them, and I'm not going to look them up. So, yes.
It's DABDA, acceptance. I hate the fact that I remember that. I think is due to.
I've got some concerns about that you remember that.
There was a TV show on Comedy Central that did a lot of work with acronyms as a joke, and I remember DABDA from TV Funhouse. Don't look that up. Let's go.
Yeah, you're just like, oh yeah, I love Wonder Shows and never look that up. That's what you just did.
Well, to be fair, the kids on the beat part of Wonder Shows is still hilarious.
Yeah, but, you know.
How do you sleep without that blood on your hands? She's talking to this Wall Street investor on the street. Reef's neglected resistance bands asks, if all is lost on the season, will Arif hang out with me more? Mark Ward asks, how gut-wrenching is it going to be when we eventually lose the Super Bowl on a missed kick?
Okay, so here's the thing about like being a Vikings fan, I guess, but like also just kind of the way football works. People were mad about the 2017 NFC Championship game. And I'm not saying there should be or shouldn't be, right? But like people were PO'd. But if you had asked any Vikings fan in week 3 after like Case Keenum put up a clunker, right? Or no, week 3 was when he went up against Tampa Bay and like played like out of his gourd. Week 4 after they lost to a bad Pittsburgh team. Or week 2 when he came in and that was bad. You know, if I had said, hey man, your 2 choices are a 7-9 season or You make it to the NFC Championship game and just get washed, just get absolutely roasted. And then when you leave, like full beer cans are being thrown at you. Like that for some, they didn't even drink them at the game. They just kept them to throw them at you afterwards, win or lose. Like they'd be like, well, yeah, but the NFC Championship game? Yeah, absolutely. And you're like, are you sure? Because it's a home game. And then it's going to be right before the Minneapolis Super Bowl. Are you sure? To be like, yeah, I can't imagine being able to make the NFC Championship game. And then the game happens, and you're like, man, I can't believe Harrison Smith got like pirouetted by Zach Ertz. That's rough. Holy crap. Wow, they scored in the first drive and then never again? Jeez. Like, after people were mad, and maybe they should be, right? But like, you say this now, and you're like, well, I would just be happy with the roster and the amount of hope that we have to be able to make it. But in that moment, that kicker lines up to kick, and in your head, you're like, dude, he's definitely going to miss it. But in the back of your head, you're like, but like my knowledge that he'll miss it will make it all the sweeter when he makes it. Like that dangerous part of you that's just like, this is how you write stories. That's going to kill you. So like, no matter what, even if right now you're like, man, I would love it if the Vikings make the Super Bowl. Dude, they make it, you're in, you're done. So, Mark, you're correct. You nailed this question. It's going to be absolutely horrendous. And then I have to write about it.
Basically, yes. Brian Jellerson asks, if we used Mr. Meeseeks to fix our kicking problem, how long would it take before society deteriorates into a purge-style anarchy? kind of mixing two episodes of Rick and Morty there, but yeah, it.
Oh yeah, there was a Purge episode of Rick and Morty. That one was funny.
Yeah, that they're both from the first season, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's rough. Although I'm just remembering the episode of Rick and Morty where Morty hits the Meeseeks boxes and then goes, "Protect me from the law" or "Shield me from the law."
Right.
So
well, in the first Mr. Meeseeks episode, like, he lives a tortured existence because he can't fix Jerry's golf game, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's just going to happen. The Meeseeks won't fix the kicking problem. They'll just live in a tortured existence, bringing forth more Meeseeks to help solve the problem. And there's got to be a metaphor here, and thus incurring more suffering in the world that would never be. Oh, that's the antinatalism argument that keeps on showing up in my timeline.
Yeah, probably. Did you notice the episode of Rick and Morty when they go to the arcade, that there's a guy helping, or there's a Meeseeks helping somebody in the video game, and eventually he disappears?
Yes.
That's a wonderful little
it's a good
Easter
egg. Yeah.
Nick Howard asks, what sort of tribute do we need to pay to whatever kicking gods we have angered?
Can't do it. The kicking gods are evil. There's no tribute.
No, there is absolutely nothing. Drunken Vike asks, given the insignificance of this game and really everything, would we not all be better served by simply strolling into the woods and spending our few meaningful moments with Mother Nature instead of mundanely torturing ourselves with Viking fandom?
Yes, but that's not how you're wired. Sorry.
Nope. There's just not as great a cell service out in the woods as a result. Kevin Sayer asks, when the 62-yarder was being lined up, I had zero doubt that it wouldn't be successful. Same. Arif, did you ever put into text about kicker success rate versus the Vikings, or was it only on the Norse Code pod?
Yeah, well, I didn't want to write about it because I had written about it way back. I looked like 4 or 5 times for this piece that I had written way back. I don't even know if it was with The Athletic. I thought it was, but I think it's not, because,
This might be the week to do it.
Well, it would be, except like last year. Was it last year? Maybe 2 years ago. Matthew Collar wrote a piece where he had consulted with a mathematician from St. John's. We'll link the piece in the show notes about that, about the fact that opponents to Vikings kickers are famously good. But I did look it up, and let's see if I can find it. So the Vikings since 2017, so the last 4 years and 2 weeks, the Vikings have ranked 29th in expected points from field goals, right? So that's essentially taking into account conversion rate from various distances. So that's essentially and there's a little bit of noise in there from some other stuff, like sometimes teams will go 4th and 4th down, altering the expected points calculation and all that. But it's a really good proxy, right? Like if the Vikings are ranked 29th, good chance that are either truly 28th, 29th, or 30th. It's pretty tight. So the Vikings ranked 29th in their ability to convert kicks after adjusting for distance is essentially what this means. It expected points from kicks. Okay, that's frightful. By the way, if you take a look, so I tweeted this out, if you take a look at that chart, the difference between 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, pretty small, right? In expected points per play. The difference between 31st and 32nd is a chasm. It's like it's minus 0.27 for 31 and minus 0.507. Like it's twice the negative, right? It's nuts, the difference. And so that's the Chargers. Back when Younghoe Koo was bad and when they had Money Badger, and you could go through a list of Chargers kickers and probably never finish in just the last 5 years. But if you take a look at the other side of it, expected points allowed on kicks, the Vikings rank dead last still, even if you updated to include 2021 data and 2020 data, which the Color article doesn't. Dead last. And so combined, the net effect is that the Vikings rank 32nd in net field goals expected points. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I tweeted this out. Some people had a couple of interesting suggestions, like, hey, these can be kind of interesting because Detroit and Chicago are really good in field goals against, right? And it's probably because they've played bad Mason Crosby, who has not, I don't think, been bad against the Vikings, but been bad against a bunch of other teams. Obviously, along with good Mason Crosby, but bad Mason Crosby and the Vikings, right? A lot. Also, the Vikings play in a dome. Is there a way to adjust for dome effects? Which EPA does not. It does not adjust kicking percentages or kicking probability through dome effects. But luckily, Caller's article went into it, and the Vikings were still top 10 or I think they're 10th in field goals allowed on the road, right? So that's just it. They have the highest success rate in the NFL against the Vikings. Kicking against the Vikings turns you into Justin Tucker, I guess. And I don't know that there were many Vikings fans that doubted that 62-yarder was going in, right? He lines up and you're just if he misses, that's nice. That's how I felt, right? If he misses, that would be
who's the returner there that was lining up in the end zone.
Did they even bother?
They did. It was the regular punt returner.
Oh, it's probably the punt returner. So that would be D.D. Westbrook.
Yeah, it
was the kick returner. It would be Amir Smith-Marset.
I was going to say I couldn't remember between the two. Yeah, it was D.D. Westbrook was lining up back there. I was just dude, don't bother.
Yeah, right. Yeah, what are you doing?
Well, I don't know what you think is going to happen, but it's not.
You got a much better chance of blocking the kick than him missing it.
Yeah, and
when's the last time the Vikings have blocked a kick? Honestly?
I literally cannot remember.
Yeah, it's brutal. So yeah, if you think that it seems unusual, right? So this is the problem, right? Because as fans of a team, if you watch one team and you watch your kicker miss all the kicks, and you watch the opponent kicker make a bunch of kicks, you're bound to think, they always make it against the Vikings, right? Because your frame of reference is the Vikings, and they've missed the most kicks, right? Or I guess third most. And so your frame of reference for an average kicker is that they always make it, right? Because you're so catastrophically bad from your perspective of making kicks that your baseline is so screwed up that an average kicking is going to look really good. And so that's your problem as you're watching other teams play the Vikings, you're yeah, it always seems like they make it, but your frame of reference is screwed up. So if you take yourself outside of that, is that true? Yeah, sorry. It's a curse from one of the many dark gods that rule the NFL. It's true.
Accurate. I was just Googling the last time that the Vikings blocked a kick, and it seems to imply that it was 2019 against the Falcons, and I don't know if that's accurate. So, but the problem with that information is that it sounds real. It sounds plausible enough to be yeah, it might have actually been 2019.
Interesting. Well, we'll keep recording, and I'll try to do a deeper search on this.
Yeah. So, but this was a game, and now that we're done with the Wailing Wall portion of today's broadcast, thanks to those who participated, this was a game that, for all intents and purposes, the first half was pretty well, or the Vikings did pretty well, and then the offense kind of disappeared for a while until it absolutely needed to come back out. Let's talk about how the offense looked, because this seemed to me like a different team for a good portion of it. It seemed like the routes were different. It seemed like Kirk Cousins' targets were different. It seemed like the run game was actually able to work. Like, this didn't seem like, and forgetting that the 2-minute drill, the receivers were running toward the outside. Like, this seemed like somebody got yelled at. Oh, and the penalties. The Vikings were, I don't remember the first time, or the Vikings, I think, got like one offside penalty or like one to start. But like, that was it.
Yeah, no, it was a crazy game if you compare it to the first game. And the Vikings were fairly decent offensively in the first game. When you take out the penalties, obviously it's difficult to convert 3rd and 24, so you end up with like 3 and outs or a lot of punts. But like in terms of an expected play basis, they were actually fine, but it just doesn't realize itself, right? Because like gaining expected points in 3rd and 24 could still result in a punt. So here you don't have that, right? Like, I think total the Vikings committed like 3 penalties total, and I think 1 or 2 of them I think were offensive. So it was not, and it was for 16 yards instead of 116 yards, and so it was not like a game where it felt like the Cardinals were out penalized, right? Or out penalizing the Vikings. So here the Vikings were able to play cleaner football, and you can kind of see what that offense is supposed to look like. I didn't have a remarkable impression of the Cardinals defense before the season. Their game against Tennessee changed my mind. This game might contribute to changing my mind back again. We'll see. But it seems like a league average defense with a very good defensive line. This was the 3rd least pressured game that Kirk Cousins has had in a Vikings uniform, period. It was like a 20% pressure rate. It was fantastic. And he also got rid of the ball really quickly. I think 6th in the NFL this week in terms of getting rid of the ball quickly. And this might contribute to it, but I am going to be writing a piece kind of later on, like, are the Vikings really a play action team? Because they have had low play action, even when you account for last week's really like not a lot of running situations. Even if you account for that, they've had actually a very low play action rate, but they've had a much lower pressure rate. They've had a much higher, they've had a much more kind of on time offense. And they're willing to like throw these slants and allow these receivers that are really good at yards after the catch to get yards after the catch. Plus, on play action, it's harder to scramble. We saw Kirk Cousins scramble in this game too. He out-scrambled Kyler Murray. So yeah, it was a really effective offense. Cousins in particular was like pretty accurate, was getting the ball out on time. Now, last week I was at the game. This week I wasn't. So I was able to identify some moments where, from the broadcast angle, it looked like Cousins might have done the right thing, but, seeing it from like seeing an open guy in the end zone, that him not throwing to it, like, so I have a little bit less context this week. I did just get the all 22, not in time to kind of review it for this podcast, but it very much seemed like Cousins was getting everything out on time, getting where it needed to go. He had an appropriate depth of target. And then you add in the fact that the Vikings were nuts running the ball, right? Like in the first half, Dalvin Cook was something like 8.5 or something yards a carry, finished with 6 yards a carry. Absolutely nuts. And so as a result, the Vikings end up like averaging 7 yards a play, which is crazy. That was a very good offense. 122 passer rating from Cousins. Not that passer rating is amazing, but people understand it. So that's a decent way to approximate his performance. 3 different touchdowns to 3 different receivers. And we had another game where Jefferson has a drop and he has a lost contested catch. His drop rate right now is 15%, which I believe over a large sample would be the highest in the NFL by a somewhat substantial margin. So I expect that to ratchet back down. And I expect him to get those yards that he lost, right? So he had 65 yards in this game. I think he had 70 odd yards in the last game. I expect him to hit kind of that 90 to 80 range when those drops come. He only had 4 drops last year, and he won over half of his contested catch opportunities. So he wasn't a great contested catch receiver. Actually, receivers tend to win more often than DBs do. So 50% is not the average. It's like closer to 75. But he still tended to win them more often than not. And here he hasn't won a single one yet this year. So I expect that to return. And even with Jefferson not playing at that really high level that we're used to seeing. And even with Thielen only getting 40 yards, I mean, the Vikings offense was just effective. And the last two games, the argument bit aside from the beginning of the last podcast, the last two games, Kirk Cousins has played really well. And in particular, in fairly clutch situations, kind of what his knock has been, but he just doesn't get the W next to his name to show for it.
So just as an update, the last blocked kick was from DJ Wanham last year, which helped the Vikings beat the Panthers.
Oh.
I did not think that it was last year. I honestly thought it was 2019, but there were plenty of articles talking about how the Panthers, or how Joey Sly messed that up. How Joey Sly needed to like kick quicker or something like that. But DJ Wanham went in and made the block.
That's crazy. I know they had like a bunch of blocks in like 2008, which was kind of nuts. But I thought like 2015 would have been the answer. I guess you take a look.
In 2014, the Vikings blocked 2 punts in a game, and that was big news.
Yeah.
I do remember that being a quite a game. But let's keep talking about this one, because there were a couple of breakout stars from it, and if we're being honest, KJ Osborne did quite the job as a wide receiver 3. And if just to jump on the other side of the ball for a second, Nick Vigil was everywhere.
He had an interesting game. I'm going to say that. So I'll put a pin in that for a second. Talk about KJ Osborne. An 18.2 yards per reception average. So that's probably not sustainable, right? But 91 yards is 91 yards. I mean, that's a great job. And I think that like they got it, right? Like I think after 2 games plus all the offseason hype, we can say they have a wide receiver 3. I think we're comfortable at that point to be able to say that. And that means that they don't have to rely on the tight end that they don't have to generate this offense. And they might transition to a 3 receiver offense, which is just generally more efficient anyway. One of the side effects of not having that tight end in there is not to have as many heavy formations, not to be able to signal that you're going to run the ball, not to be able to move in and out of run pass plays as often, just because that tight end should be able to both block and receive, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility. Whereas KJ Osborne, I mean, he's a good receiver, but he's probably not a good blocker. So, oh no, you have to throw it, right? This is resulting in a fairly efficient offense. I think that Osborne is demonstrating, like, he didn't even see the field last year. Like, how wild is that? Like, he was on the roster. He was an active game day roster guy. He was terrible at punt returns. And so people just wanted him gone. Next year, he's the leading receiver in a game that includes Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Like, that's crazy.
That was quite the performance. At some point you're just sitting there just going, I was actually confused at the numbering on his jersey because it's so similar to Jefferson. I was like, oh, Jefferson caught it. No, that's KJ Osborne out there burning a corner.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, and totally makes sense, right? Like in camp, I was like, oh, Jarius Wright took one to the no Jarius Wright. Like it's been so long since like there's been an effective wide receiver 3 that you're just like, your mind is going to someone else. You're just like, that
hasn't played here in like 3 seasons. Yeah. Which is quite the statement. But yeah, he had quite the game, and the offensive line held for the most part, and not in a not like a penalized way.
Not in a holding kind of way.
Yeah. Like in James's poor phrases section of the show. Yeah. The offensive line did well. They helped protect, and they were able to just hold it open just enough for Delvin Cook to just squeeze through some of the tightest of openings to be able to make it, Delvin Cook did well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I want to highlight Ezra Cleveland's game in particular. I thought there were a couple of mistakes that he made as a run blocker, but for the most part, he was a huge positive, especially at the second level. Great at finishing, great at keeping these lanes open. Garrett Bradbury was a really good run blocker. As a pass protector, I thought Bradbury just kind of gave up some stuff. It wasn't nearly as bad as like last week, right? So huge improvement for him. Rashad Hill is like an issue. He continues to be an issue. But like last week, that was more penalties than it was pressures. This week he gave up some pressures. So that's a concern. I don't know if I trust like Christian Darrisaw or anything yet because he's not even healthy enough to play. So by the time he is he going to even be ready? I don't know. So that's going to continue to be a concern. I thought Brian O'Neill had a bounce back game. Obviously, last week he had a couple of penalties, and that hurts. But he also just wasn't playing at that level that you expect somebody now earning his contract, but you expect somebody of his reputation to be able to do. So I thought that overall the offensive line did really well. It's tough sometimes to separate like, hey, you got rid of the ball quickly, so there wasn't that much pressure, versus Cousins held on to the ball too long, but there wasn't. Like, that's tough, right? Like, how much of it is in the offensive line? How much is it the timing? And I think here both played a pretty big role. But I thought that based off of what we saw, especially you take a look at winning off the snap, I thought Ezra Cleveland played really lights out. And there's like 2 or 3 plays in the run game where like you didn't really see it, but as a pass protector, he was solid. And then the mistakes that he made in the run game, he was able to make up for with second level blocks, which, as we saw, because of the number of really good Dalvin Cook runs, ended up mattering a lot. So really, really great game from him. So yeah, I mean, it's cool to be able to talk about the offensive line. Obviously, there's that problem at left tackle that you could see coming from a mile away when you realize that Garrett Bradbury wasn't going to be able to play. But yeah, I thought that this is the kind of like the Vikings offense with a good offensive line, 2, now 3 good receivers, a great running back, a very good fullback. That sounds pretty tough to stop, I think. Like, if you get rid of the biggest pain point to the Vikings offense the last 5, 6, 7 years, the offensive line, it's tough not to see them scoring a bunch of points. So, I mean, that's great to see. Obviously, the results of that offense haven't always produced as many points as like some of these other exciting offenses we've seen around the league. So we can't just say, hey, they're an explosive, amazing offense quite yet. But it's tough to see if they can maintain this offensive line performance. It's tough to see them finding many areas where they'll be completely stymied. So this is really good to see.
Yeah, and let's be honest for a moment. The Vikings offense did very well in the first half and looked to be clicking on all cylinders, minus a missed extra point. But in the second half, this was an offense that didn't seem like they could do anything until it absolutely mattered at the very end of the game.
Yeah, that's part of it too. Like, that's important. And this is kind of worth reviewing, of course. But like, when you get to like the third quarter, by that point, the Vikings have scored 30 points, right? They finished with 33. So obviously they don't score any more points until that final, like, not the final, obviously, but like until the field goals that they get at the top of the fourth quarter. And that was when the Dalvin Cook, like, train, I guess, just kind of dried up a little bit. There were a couple of runs for no gains or only for 3 yards on 2nd and 10. There was a couple of tackles for loss. And the Vikings, of course, are like fairly reliant on Dalvin Cook playing well. And that, I guess, is the concern. It's less about if the offensive line is all there and you've got Dalvin Cook and you've got all these receivers and you've got a good quarterback. Then the next concern is if they're going to play call themselves into oblivion. And so, like, a run up the middle for no gain, followed by like a run for -2 yards. Like, that's how you probably lose. And that's what the third quarter looked like for the Vikings, where in that first half, Dalvin Cook averaging 8.5 yards a carry. In the third quarter, a bunch of runs that weren't getting anywhere. I think there was like one good run for like 8 yards, and that was on 2nd and long. So it's like, how much is that really worth? They gave up their only sack of the game in the fourth quarter. Yeah, so there were like some issues that showed up. You had a false start on the waiver tight end that pushes you back a little bit. You got backed up at the end of the end zone because of a weird special teams play from Dede Westbrook. Stuff that's like related to the offense. It's not necessarily the offense.
That Dede Westbrook play, just for a moment. You're taught in what, middle school to let it fly over your head if you're at the 5-yard line?
Yeah, absolutely wild. Like, the worst thing that can happen if you let it go is functionally what happened, right? Like, oh no, they'll down it at the 1 because they'll get there in time. Guess where you started? The 2. and then the false start brought you to the 1. Which like that false start might have been a blessing in disguise because that was going to be a fullback dive. That was wild. Like he obviously so he catches it. He sees he's got a blocker in front of him, starts angling for it, sees a bunch of people come onto him, so he tries to get around. And like I get the thought process. Like I've seen Cordero Patterson do it, but like the difference is that he's Cordero Patterson, right? Like you can't be doing this. Like you haven't proven that you can do it, and you're not a rookie, so you don't get time to prove it. You just can't be doing it.
And no one is going to be upset with you if they get pinned at the 1. It wasn't your fault. You're taught to let it fly over your head at that point. No one is going to cut you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I understand the field and need to make a play, but you're not doing it from the 5. So, yeah, absolutely let that one go. If it bounces out, it bounces out. If they down it, they down it. But like the net result of this play, of course, was the worst thing that could have happened anyway. So yeah, that was pretty wild. And that's the kind of stuff where like you say, hey, they didn't score on that drive. What happened? Well, it's like they got backed up to the 1, man. I don't like, what are you gonna do? Plus like this Jordan Berry thing where like he like chooses some halves to be good and some halves to be bad. Cause like first half against the Bengals, pretty bad. Second half against the Bengals, lights out. Kind of the same thing here. He had a 60-yard punt there, but he had like a 39-yard punt.
37, I believe, yeah.
37-yard punt in like I want to say the second quarter. And it's just like, I just want him to be consistent. Like, what did Zimmer say about Greg Joseph? I just want him to be consistent. Yeah. I just want Jordan Berry to be consistent. But yeah, like that offense was really more a product of, hey, you're really reliant on running the ball. There's a lot of evidence that suggests if you run the ball well in the first half, that there's not a lot of support that you're going to be able to run the ball in the second half. And I remember looking at this because I remember like the game before DeFilippo got fired was against the New England Patriots, right? And the Vikings didn't really run the ball in the second half. And Zimmer says after the game, we were running the ball well, we should have run the ball. And he says a bunch of other stuff. Like obviously DeFilippo is going to get fired. Eventually, if they weren't going to score some points and they hadn't been scoring points all season, why would they start now? I remember looking at it, it's like, dude, if you run well in the first half, would that imply that you're going to continue running well in the second half? And I was like, well, the Vikings weren't just running well in terms of yards per carry. They had a high success rate. They had a bunch of runs of 7 yards. So if you took away their biggest run or their biggest 2 runs, the yards per carry would actually still be very high. So how do I do this? And I just decided to go into like the top 50 first half running performances and just doing that game by game to see what I saw, which was not crazy rigorous or anything like that, but what I saw was that there was virtually no relationship with how well you ran in the first half versus how you ran in the second. There was some, right? But it was small. And so like the Vikings kind of tricked themselves here, right? Where Dalvin Cook is playing out of his mind. The offensive line is blocking really well. They start running the ball again in the third quarter. It's not working. Now they're behind the sticks. Fourth quarter, they're backed up at the 1. They don't score. And like, it's the same offense as the first half offense, right? But it's being put, I guess without the running success, but being put into situations where they can't do anything with it, right? Like last year, the Vikings ranked 32nd in offensive field position. So despite their per play efficiency numbers, they didn't really put up the points on the board. So like, that's why they ranked fourth in yards and 10th in points, right? And the second half here is a really good kind of encapsulation of what that means, even when the offense is good.
So we were talking a bit about the running plays and how it didn't seem like it's the second half didn't seem like they were doing as well with it, and it seemed like the timing was off and everything. But the defense for the Vikings was really all over the place. If we're talking about being consistent or inconsistent, this was a Vikings team that it looked like they were involved in the shootout to begin with. Then it looked like the Vikings were owning the Cardinals. And then as soon as that missed extra point happened, you could have like gotten up to go to the bathroom and come back and been confused as to what happened with a 14-point swing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
like, oh, the Vikings got a fumble? That's crazy. Oh, they're going to review it. All right, well, I'm going to go to the bathroom real quick. That goes long and you go, wait, what happened? What happened to the Vikings?
Yeah. crazy sequence, right? Because it's like 23-21, right? When they get the ball. And then they like immediately turn that at the end of the second quarter into a field goal. And then after that, they, the Vikings get a pick six. You're like, okay, it's fine. It's in the bag. And then they just start scoring points, man. They just start scoring points. Like it was 20-7 to get to 20-21, 20-21, ends up getting 30-31. Like it's just like, it felt kind of inevitable. That first half, well, the first quarter and then the next 13 minutes were like really great, or I should say the next 9 minutes, right? Because that's kind of when things started going off the rails, right? Kyler Murray scrambles for a touchdown. The fumble that you mentioned was like not a fumble, but like we didn't know it was a fumble. And then we got tricked into, but then there was an offensive holding penalty.
Like the fumble itself didn't even appear to be a fumble. There are eagle-eyed NFL writers on Twitter like, I didn't, wait, that was a fumble? Like nobody could actually see it.
Everybody was surprised that there was a fumble call.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
and Nick Vigil had it, I believe. Yeah. Something like that. Like, how?
Wild. And we learned a lesson that they are not catch rules, they are possession rules at the sideline. And so in order to obtain possession of the ball, which I believe is what Kenneth Allen tweeted at me, that they're possession rules, not catch rules. But yeah, you need 2 feet in, even though it's not like a catch. Very weird, which I'm not going to like knock a linebacker for not dragging his toe, right? Like that's weird. But
let alone Nick Vigil, who at second string.
Essentially, right? Like he's the sub-package third linebacker, but like he's effectively a second string linebacker who's being forced to play because of the Anthony Barr injury mystery. So, and Nick Vigil is such an interesting, because he had some plays. I mean, if we don't count that, like if we pretend that fumble never happened, right? Vigil has some like absolutely great plays, right? Like he's like, there's some where he's like closing down on a short yardage, whenever. Great. That's fantastic. Good to see. But like, we get rid of that fumble and he's got that interception and it's a pick six and it looks amazing. And, then the next drive, he gets like a tackle for loss or something like that. But he's consistently out of his gap. He's consistently pushed in the run game. And he ends up with like a very weird, like I was saying that he's really inconsistent, that he has had a really weird, bizarre game. Obviously the game got more bizarre after the fumble, but like, he ended up with like, I think it was like his PFF grade was crazy because his coverage grade is kind of high, right? Because the pick six, it's hard to get a bad coverage grade there. But he missed a couple of tackles, so his tackling grade is low, and he got pushed around in the run game, so his run grade is low. And he did get like he allowed 46 yards in coverage, right? Which for a linebacker is fairly high. Like a lot of people are mad at Bashaud Breeland, and like, yeah, I guess, but he allowed 48 yards, right? Like Nick Vigil only allowed 2 fewer yards in coverage. Now, some of that is 1st and 10, 4-yard pass, you block it up. That's a good play for the linebacker. It counts as 4 yards of coverage against you. But like that's not like amazing, right? So he had a very up and down game. And maybe it's the calf injury, but Eric Kendricks has now had multiple, like both games he's missed multiple times. I think he missed 3 tackles in both games, right? Which he doesn't, like 6 missed tackles, that takes half a season for him. Like, in 2 games, that's pretty wild. So that's an issue. Like, I don't know if his injury is playing a role in that. I would expect it does. But that has to get resolved. I will say, though, that the defensive line performance was lights out. Like, I'm really glad that I stuck with my Danielle Hunter take, that he was having just this amazing offseason, because after the Cincinnati game, you're like, well, he looked good, I guess. He had the 1 sack, he had a couple pressures, but it wasn't like amazing. And in this game, he played lights out. And it helped that he went up against a backup right tackle. But a lot of his pressures, and at least I think 2 of his sacks actually came against the left tackle, who's not a backup. He's the starter. He was meant to be the starter. And he killed it, right? He got 3 sacks. He got 4 hurries. We saw a really great game from Michael Pierce. Just fantastic at preventing, guards from getting up to the second level. So Eric Kendricks can go into the run lane and miss a tackle, I guess, but help stop the run. So I thought those two had a lights out performance. I I thought, Stephen Weatherly actually played better than DJ Wanham, which I think Pro Football Focus says too. But like that aside, like that was a thought I had, well before the grades came out, because Weatherly was playing this kind of all-around game where he was doing a pretty decent job against the run, which also he was better against the run, I think, last week as well. And that brings up an interesting question. Like DJ Wanham, to me, was clearly the starter going into the season. He had much better practices, much better training camp. The Vikings evidently agreed. And now Weatherly seems to be outplaying him a little bit, and he has these past 2 games. So the preseason also, Wanham had some bad moments. So I wonder if that's something that's going to come up, that they're going to change the starter there, because Wanham was not, especially in the run game, was not killing it.
Well, let's talk about something that metaphorically killed the Vikings here, because this was ugly, and it was one of the most wide open passes I've ever seen in professional football. And the advanced stats graphic that came out, or like the next gen graphic, made it look like this. People were on Twitter were like, no, it's not Patrick Peterson's responsibility. It was somebody else. But Patrick Peterson was the only person you saw for miles there. So can we talk about the touchdown pass that looked to be one of the easiest in recent memory?
Yeah, that one is kind of interesting. So like, Aqib Talib indicated that it was probably on Patrick Peterson, because in cover 3 you've got a deep third, and I was wondering, is that cover 3? Because if he's sitting against the short, but it's not really a short route. Like it looked like an extended version of a smash concept where you've got. So the smash concept is a very common. We saw it a bunch in the previous decade of football because of all the cover 2 that we were seeing. The smash concept is when you run a corner route from one of your receivers, probably the slot receiver, and the corner route is a route that goes straight for about 17 or so yards, depending on your drop back depth and how fast the receiver is and all that, depending on the timing, but about 17 to 22 yards, and then it angles towards the sideline, right? So it heads towards the corner, right? So that's the corner route, and then next to that receiver, probably the outside guy, runs like a hitch or a short route or like or a speed out or something that keeps that cornerback conflicted, because he has to choose between floating underneath the corner route or staying on top of the hitch route. And that puts stress on the cover 2 safety, who has to cover like half the field, right? And so that is what, when John Gruden always talks about the turkey hole, sometimes that's the seam between the 2 safeties. Sometimes that's the corner route here. And it looked like that, except Rondale Moore was like 50 yards downfield, and the route that Patrick Peterson was covering was 22. It wasn't 5. And so it was like this really weird extended version where it looked like Patrick Peterson was biting on the hitch route of a smash concept, but that's not what it was. So we were able to ask Xavier Woods about that. Like, how did that happen? And so he says, and he gave a great answer. We were in a fire zone blitz, and they ran an all-go special, which is just 3 verticals. And the third receiver ran the over route, and I ended up taking the over route, and Peterson ended up taking number 1. So to kind of break that down, fire zone blitz, it's a very common zone blitz. You see it a little bit in the Dick LeBeau, Dom Capers style of zone blitzing defense. It became super popular in Nick Saban's Alabama defense. What happens is, it's a blitz with zone coverage principles, and you've got 3 up top and 3 at the bottom. And what kind of characterizes it to a lot of people is that you've got a defensive lineman dropping down into one of those bottom zones. So you've got 2 blitzers or something like that, right? So you've got 6 in coverage, which means you're sending 5. And so sometimes that 5th one is a slot corner. Sometimes you've got a linebacker and a slot corner, and you're dropping your defensive end into coverage. But that's kind of the fire zone blitz. So then he says they ran an all-go special, which he indicates as 3 verticals. The third receiver ran the over route. So the over route crosses the field. It's like, the corner route I just described happens on the same side of the field, right? So if you run a corner, if you're lined up on top of the numbers and you run a corner route, you're running it to the near sideline. If you're running an over route, you're on the other side of your offensive line, crossing the midfield, crossing the hashes to get over to the opposite sideline. And so Xavier Woods says he has that. And then Rondale Moore, and here's where I'm kind of confused because the way the Vikings run their zones is it's not a landmark zone. If you're in your zone and your receiver leaves your zone, that doesn't mean that that's not your guy. So Mackenzie Alexander has the short zone in a fire zone blitz, and Patrick Peterson has a deep zone. But sometimes in these situations, when you've got a 1 and a 2, so 1 is on the outside, 2 is on the inside, and then 3 is even further on the inside, right? So that's how they number receivers. The inside corner will check to see if the 2 is running vertical and stay with them. And if not, check to see if the 1 is. So yeah, I don't know if Mackenzie Alexander was supposed to carry Rondale Moore deep on that vertical. I don't know if Moore, when a play runs that long, the coverage rules kind of break down. So I don't know if Moore saw that and he saw that, Xavier Woods was taking the over. And in that case, that means he's going to the opposite side of the field that Peterson is on, carrying that over route, which means that between Peterson covering a third and the center fielder safety covering that middle but taking the over with him based on the coverage rules, that second receiver you just don't have, right? And running 3 verticals out of a 3-by-1 set against cover 3, that's a cover 3 beater, right? So sometimes they just call the right play, but the play extended for so long that your coverage rules change. So Xavier Woods then added, Kyler did a great job of getting outside of the pocket. Rondale just kept going straight. Peterson's guy kind of stopped. My guy kept going over. And Rondale just happened to be down the field wide open. And like I said, Kyler Murray did a great job of getting outside the pocket and making that throw there. So Xavier Woods does a great job of telling us what the play is, giving us the tools to identify it, like if we wanted to research it, by using the most common terminology, which, that's such an underrated aspect. Like, first of all, I just want to say, Xavier Woods, thank you for, because he did the same thing when he's talking about his interception. He said, hey, we're in cover 3. I've got the post because I've got the near post. Cover 6. I've got half the field. I've got the near post. It's fantastic that you give us these terms without giving away, the specifics of the Vikings coverage scheme, right? Of the specific rules that allow us to learn more about the game without throwing anybody under the bus. Because he didn't say whose responsibility it was, right? Which, ultimately that's kind of what we wanted to know, but he doesn't have an incentive to tell you that. So he gives us this other stuff, which to me is fascinating. So I just, as an aside, I love this. But yeah, so that is just sometimes they call the right play. That probably plays a part of it. Sometimes Kyler Murray just gets to scramble outside of the pocket. That's a part of it. And sometimes you don't know, what are the rules here in that situation to kind of account for this? Because the reason that Zimmer defenses were so complex in 2017, 2018, tragically in 2020 for a while, is because they usually have a way of accounting for all of these, cover 3, cover 4, cover 6 beaters when they run cover 3, cover 4, cover 6. So I don't know if there was a rule for the defense there that would have accounted for that, but that's something to keep in mind. Super wide open, looked like nobody was covering him, maybe because nobody was.
Can we talk about Patrick Peterson and being a liability out there? Because other than Rashad Breeland, Patrick Peterson, this was his big return game. You had said for months that this was something that Patrick Peterson looked slow, didn't look like this was going to be a good signing, didn't look like it was going to end up being a good fit because of being slow. If he was brought on for, teaching the youngins how to act, fine, but he shouldn't be playing out there. And boy, did he get he just got burned.
Well, it kind of so here's the issue with that, right? If we don't include that Rondale Moore reception, which again, we don't actually know. Aqib Talib has played corner for years, right? He's super smart. They've always asked him to match up against the most dangerous receiver. He was a Gronk eraser, so he was able to go up against tight ends. He was a shifty receiver guy, super physical, and played in some defenses somewhat similar to this. So he would probably know, and he put it on Patrick Peterson. So I'm not saying, that there's no evidence that it's not. Maybe it was. But if you take that away, and you take a look at some of the other stuff, he gives up 21 yards in coverage. And he primarily lined up against DeAndre Hopkins. And DeAndre Hopkins had fewer What was the over-under from last episode? 86.5. And we set like a success point at something like 60, right? 65?
Yeah, something like that.
Well, Hopkins had less than 65, I think. In a game, so here's the interesting thing about DeAndre Hopkins, and he had 54, and Kyler Murray. Hopkins was the most targeted receiver in the NFL last year as a percentage of team targets. So in a game where Murray has over 400 throwing yards, 36 attempts, Hopkins has 4 targets for 54 yards. Peterson might have had a good game. It depends on the one play, the Rondale Moore play.
Well, this is also, if you wanted to look at it like this as well, how out of position was he during that touchdown?
If it's on him, he's way out of position. He's miles out of position, right?
Well, I'm not even talking about the one. I'm not even talking about the long one. I'm talking about the one that was in the red zone that he was way out of position on.
Yeah, that's fair. A 7-yard or however many yard touchdown, 15-yard touchdown. That's not nothing. And Hopkins having 54 yards plus a touchdown. That's not ideal as a corner. But I think that in terms of the expectations that you have for DeAndre Hopkins and the level of play that you're worried about from Patrick Peterson, that's probably fine. Now, on that play, there's 2 things happening. One is that Kyler Murray is scrambling and gaining another 7 seconds, right? That's tough to defend. It's very difficult to put that on the corner when the play runs for that long. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind. The second thing is on the replay, which I think it's the first or second replay that's shown on the broadcast, is able to watch some on top footage. Hopkins is very clearly about to, so scramble rules, he's running the same direction as the quarterback. That's what you're supposed to do. He's running essentially inside like a post, right? So he's running towards the goalposts. And then scramble rules set in, ball's not coming to him. He cuts back to the outside, and it's kind of clear that that's what he's going to do. And I think Peterson sees it, and it doesn't matter. Hopkins explodes out of his cut, and Peterson is just toasted. And if this occurred in the 2 to 3 seconds that a play occurs in, if it occurs in the normal route, you're just like, that quarterback got absolutely demolished. That's on the highlight reel for the receiver. But here it's just a combination of, well, you can't really expect coverage to last or hold up for that long, but also that specific play maybe you should have made. So yeah, he got burned there, and that's on him. I think overall, depending on the Rondale Moore thing, even if you include that Hopkins touchdown, I think overall he had a fairly good game. And by good, I mean good based off of our expectations. The Vikings brought him in with the expectation that they could coach him up to be or play him in techniques or play him in situations where he'd be an above average corner. And I think that's kind of where he is. DeAndre Hopkins is a top 3 receiver. And so that's going to happen sometimes. At least you didn't get mossed, right? If we were worried about whether or not he could be a Darrelle Revis style corner, this would be a disappointing game, right? I guess the first game wouldn't have been because they just kept on picking on Breland. This game, they didn't target Peterson that much, and the target to Rondale Moore wasn't because Peterson was assigned to him. It was because they probably just called a cover 3 beater against cover 3.
Well, let's talk about the coaching decisions that were involved in the very end of the game. We're kind of running a little bit long here, so let's talk about the end of the game and talk about how Kirk Cousins was able to march it down the field. The probability looked good for the Vikings, and then they ended up deciding to kick with a fair amount of time left while rolling through the Cardinals defense. Was this the right call, ignoring the fact that this was a missed kick? Was this the right call, and could they have done something to increase their probability of actually getting the kick in?
Right. So obviously we don't really have much of this discussion unless the kick is missed, right? So that's the background of the conversation, that we're probably not having the conversation because we tend to forget about these coaching decisions until a loss occurs. And, maybe we should normalize talking about them in wins, and sometimes we do that on this podcast, which is nice. But for the most part, some people are annoyed because that is largely the case, right? That we only talk about this in losses, right? And so you think, hey, kicker's got to make a 37-yard kick, right? Which, like, it just brings up that Bombani Jones bit. Got to make a 45-yard field goal. Like, it's like 30 people on the planet, right? But, like, he had made 2 50-yard kicks, but also, like, he missed an extra point, right? He's not been automatic in this game. Someone told me, in arguing with me, so I shouldn't say someone told me, but someone brought up the point, rather, that, this is a 90% kick. So how could they possibly improve on that? How could they possibly, take the risk of extending the drive and potentially losing the ball and, or, they score too quickly, Kyler Murray gets the ball back, right? How could they risk that instead of taking a 90% proposition? So, I thought about it, right? Because the Vikings fumbled in the game against the Bengals, right? The Dalvin Cook fumble. Obviously, that wasn't a product of like trying to they had to run a play there, right? They weren't in kicking distance. But that's got to be in the back of your head, right? Like, I remember what the risk of running additional plays. It's that fumble. Same thing with the Chiefs, right? At the end of the Ravens game, right? So the Ravens, and I tweeted this out kind of sarcastically. So the Ravens spent a bit of extra time getting closer to field goal range to make the kick a more sure proposition, despite having the Randy Moss of kickers, right? Like having the best kicker in the history of the position by a substantial margin, right? They were like, yeah, but he might miss. So let's move it up. So like, should the Vikings have weighed the possibility of an end of game turnover or an end of game timing error, which is not really in the cards at this point because like there's like 27 seconds left, right? So it's not like, oh my God, you scored a touchdown with 20 seconds left. Like, you lose to a 20-second Hail Mary. That doesn't mean the touchdown was necessarily awful. That means you got to do some stuff, right? So what are the odds, right? So I looked this up. I looked at every kick that was between 36 and 38 yards the past 10 years. And that turned out to be obviously it's a pretty high proposition. You'd expect most kickers that don't play for the Vikings to get that, right? So what's the make rate there? The make rate is about 90. I looked at it was about 87%. That was the make rate. Fantastic. Functionally, humans can't really figure out the difference between 87 and 90%, but functionally 90, right? Great. If you got 10 more yards in the play, if we looked at distances between 28 and 30, right? Or 27, 29, whatever, say 10 yards further, right? What's the make rate? It's 97.5. It is a 10% higher make rate. I am confident that a Vikings kicker can miss a 97.6% chance of a field goal. I remember because I saw it in 2015, right? That's the same distance, right? So I'm not saying it's impossible. In fact, James, your position is it doesn't matter. They would have screwed it up somehow. Kirk would have thrown a pick. The kicker would have missed. Dalvin would have fallen. It doesn't matter, right? They would have found a way to screw it up. Fine. Perfectly reasonable position to take. But in the realm of like analytics, right? And this isn't the most disastrous decision they made. They should have gone for it with 2:52 left, and they did it. And I remember, like, I was saying they should go for it, and then Will was like, "Are you sure?" And I was kind of surprised because Will wasn't alone. Will Raggets. Will wasn't alone in this. And to me, it was like, obviously they should. Fourth Down Bot says they should, which is Ben Baldwin's Fourth Down Bot, and a different machine said even more that they should have gone for it, right? The Edge Sports, which said that Mike Zimmer had 3 of the 5 worst coaching decisions of the weekend, which is not true because they didn't include David Culley's decision to decline a penalty in order to punt. Nuts. But like, we're talking about this because it happened at the end of the game, but like, I think a 10% increase in your chance of making the kick is worth running 1 or 2 additional plays. Because like, what are the disastrous outcomes here? It's a fumble on a run, or a tackle for loss, or a sack, or an interception. Okay, those are the outcomes that prevent that kick from happening, or whatever, right? That make that kick. And like, honestly, a sack doesn't take you, unless Kirk Cousins is taking like a 19-yard sack, right? A sack reduces your make rate pretty substantially, but that's not a no. That's not a zero. So the odds on a pass play of that happening for an average Kirk Cousins pass is about 6.5%. When you include the fact, and I know Kirk Cousins gets knocked for situational awareness, I'm at the top of that list for knocking him. But when you include the fact that it's an end of game situation, that you're more likely to throw the ball away if you don't see something, that you're more likely to throw away from a pick. I remember the Kevin King interception, but for the most part, Cousins has in those situations avoided it. Like, his issue at the end of games is that he throws to the open receiver too often, right? It's not that he throws the like awful pick at the end of games. It's that the clock is managed poorly, and that's on the table here, right? 27 seconds left. You manage the clock poorly, you're out. But it's enough room where like one or two plays is not a huge issue here. You have the timeout, so you don't have to worry about like, you throw it down the field. They're at the 4-yard line. You have to run up the space. You don't have to worry about it. You can just call a timeout when there's 6 seconds left. Fine. If you run a play and you get 10 yards, it's a 10% make rate. Your odds of doing nothing don't matter here, because if you throw an incompletion, you can just center the ball on a kneel and then call a timeout. That's not the issue, right? It's just, what are the odds of, what does a completion do for you, and what does a not completion do for you? And the not completion odds are lower, much lower than the odds of increasing your chance of making a field goal. So I do think the Vikings made a mistake here. I don't think that is like the reason they lost, right? The reason they lost is that they didn't, and this is exactly what Adam Thielen said too, is that they didn't make this block here, is that they didn't make this catch here, is that they didn't, fill this gap here on defense. It's that they didn't, get the cover. There are 8 million reasons that they lost, right? They lost by 2 points, right? So there's 8 million reasons. In that list of reasons is the missed extra point, is the missed field goal, fine, right? All of those are reasons that they lost. So I'm not saying the reason that they lost is because they didn't move the ball 10 more yards in this final situation. Yeah, they should expect a kicker to make that kick. But if you're the Vikings, why do you not make your kicker kick from the most advantageous position humanly possible? That's my issue.
And if we look at the actual kick itself, Chris Cluey had tweeted out that he pushed it, meaning that his plant foot was either a tiny bit too close to the ball or slightly in front, causes you to hit it before your leg is fully locked out, and the arc of your kick is headed right for a right-footed kicker instead of straight. And all of his misses have been to the right. So it's worth pointing out there.
And that's interesting. And then he mentioned actually, so I saw that Cluey tweet and I thought it was interesting when Greg Joseph came onto a presser earlier today. We're recording this on Monday. He said that it's because he doesn't keep his head down in terms of follow through, which like they're not mutually exclusive. One could be related to the other, right? I don't know enough about kicking mechanics. It's the official stance of the podcast that I don't know anything about kickers, but like it's kind of interesting that he has also identified that all his kicks have missed wide right, at least in like game situations. So maybe he can work mechanically to fix that.
It is also worth noting that, and then perhaps this is just me kind of attempting to read his body language on that. I almost think he expected to be iced. Like
that's interesting.
The way that he looked right after he had kicked it. Like if you watch him after the kick, he almost looked like he was like looking to the side, like did you call timeout? Because I was expecting to be iced here. Like I don't. The psych out icing effect, and maybe I'm reading into something that doesn't exist, which I've been known to do. But
right,
honestly, I expected him to be iced.
Many exes can attest to. Right?
Well, yes, but I expected him to be iced there.
Yeah, I saw someone tweet. I forget who it was. I don't mean to put you on blast, but that he knew that he missed it from the moment he connected with it because you could tell from his body language. And when I looked at that, That's what I was looking for. So that didn't even cross my mind. So, maybe I'll take a gander at it again. But I did not see that at all from the video that I saw. It definitely looked like he was surprised. Maybe he was surprised because it wasn't iced. Maybe he was surprised because he missed. He says he thought he made good contact, so he didn't realize it was going to go out until he saw the trajectory of the ball, right? Obviously, there's a lot of situations where a kicker kicks it, they know immediately, oops, like every time I pull up for a three, yeah, okay, I know that this one's not going in. I'm bad at basketball, shock. But I'm annoying. That's my trait. I know that's a shock too. But yeah, I mean, like you can tell a lot of times when your shots go awry. I'm sure that's true for kickers. That's got to be true for golfers. But sometimes you feel like you hit it, and it you don't know that you didn't until like the ball just starts going the wrong way, and you're like, man, did not feel like that was happening. So yeah, that kind of reminds me of the one time, I guess he's missed a couple since then, but the first time Justin Tucker missed an extra point, his eyes, like he bugged out. He was like, what?
That's possible?
That doesn't happen in this universe. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Sometimes when I go at length about something, it's because I had a Twitter argument about it, which makes it seem like I think it's more important than it is. This is not that important in the grand scheme of things, but I had an argument about it, so I just wanted to get it off my chest.
So the Vikings lost. The Vikings are 0-2. Zimmer had said in the press conference that he thought that they were about 2 plays away from being a 2-0 team. So I suppose that and $1 in your pocket gives you exactly $1. It is unfortunate that this is the start of the season, and they are now going to be playing Seattle in Minnesota for the first time in forever, coming up here. And this is we're looking at a team that's staring down a very real possibility of being 0-3 or 0-4 to start the year. This isn't a playoff team, if that is what you're looking at, correct?
Yeah. I think there's one team in recent history that started off 0-3, made the playoffs. That's a Deshaun Watson-led 2018 Texans, which that was a weird season, and obviously
that division that year was also atrocious.
Yeah, right. So that's, not great precedent. Obviously, the Vikings have made it after starting off 0-2. I think 2008 is the most famous example of that. But I've got an article going up at The Athletic about whether or not the Vikings are done and whether or not you can consider 0-2 a reason to check out of the team. If you're a fan of the Vikings, you'll define it on your own terms. If you think it's a reason to check out, that's fine. But I'll make an argument that maybe you shouldn't. In part because it helps me if you continue reading about the Vikings. So, maybe I'm bad. But, I don't think, the Vikings are not at a 0% chance, nor are they anything close to a 0% chance. So that's the article. That's going to go up. But if they go 0-3, that's it, right? Because even if they're a good team, right? If a good team goes 0-3, which has happened, that's such a difficult hole to crawl out of. Now, mind you, in a 17-game season, it's a little bit different, but it's such a difficult hole to crawl out of that you have to make up that deficit without making any more mistakes, right? Because how many more losses do you have left available to you? In a 17-game season, it's probably 4 is how many you have left. So then you have to go in 13 games, you have to go 9-4. That's really hard, even if you're a good team. So that's the problem with 0-3. It's not, it proves that you're bad. It might, but it's that even if you're good, and the Vikings are not good, they're not bad, but they're not good, right? They're average to above average from a bunch of efficiency metrics. I discussed that in more detail in the article going up, but they are an above average-ish team, probably, right? That's the strongest statement you can make. And so if they go into a hole, that's it. I don't know that an above average team goes 9-4. The Vikings have the 5th to 7th most difficult upcoming schedule in the NFL. Again, based off of various analytics that may or may not be correct, but it's probably a difficult schedule. Right? They got the Ravens, they got the Chargers, they got the entire NFC West, which right now they've got all 4 of them are in the top 10. that's not easy, right? At least half the NFC West will be done by then. But it's not like you expect to win against the 49ers, even if they've got Jimmy Garoppolo. But if they throw in that read option safety, I mean, that's going to be tough too, right? Then you've also got the game against Chicago, which always seems like that away game is a loss. So it's tough, right? So 0-3, that's probably it. 0-4 against the guy that you were considering to be your head coach. That's probably curtains. We're probably talking about what the philosophy be, should hire a new coach, whether or not it makes sense to hire an offensive coordinator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is tough. Like, part of the reason the schedule is tough is because you've got games against Seattle and the Browns. The Browns are a really good team. They demonstrated that against the Chiefs. They made like one mistake. And against the Chiefs, you can't make one mistake unless you're Lamar Jackson, and you can make three. They made one mistake against the Chiefs, and they're a really good team. Like, they held their own for 3.5 quarters. So this is tough, right? If they were 0-2 going into a Detroit Lions game, which I guess they're not as bad as they seem, or 0-2 heading into, I guess, an Andy Dalton Chicago game, they seem pretty bad. Then, you could say, well, okay, they'll bounce back. But digging yourself out of a hole, even if you've got some of those bad teams on the schedule, that's tough. That's a fire run.
Yeah, this doesn't look good, admittedly. But let's head over to the mailbag. We've got plenty of good stuff in here, including the start, which is always an important question. Let's go to Hustle Chilston, who asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited is a Reef that it is officially a Reef week?
Normally I would groan. I would say, I can't believe you guys. Screw you. But earlier today, again, we're recording on Monday, I got off the phone with one of the directors. I don't think it's the executive director, but one of the outreach coordinators maybe of the Lavender Rights Project, which, if you're unfamiliar, every year that the Vikings play the Seahawks, so every year, the Seahawks fans do a Reef Week where they harass me. I say harass. It's obviously I'm never really bothered by it, but I'm performatively bothered by it because it's fun. They harass me for a week. I get caught in a Kafkaesque series of traps and labyrinths, and then I ask the Seahawks community and everybody else to donate to the Lavender Rights Project. So Lavender Rights Project, they just updated their mission statement. So let me actually read it directly from their website. So their mission is: the Lavender Rights Project elevates the power, autonomy, and leadership of the Black and intersex and gender diverse community through intersectional legal and social services. We utilize the law as an organizing principle to affirm our civil rights and self-determination. Our organization disrupts oppressive systems that target Black, gender diverse, and intersex communities of color and lead to disproportionate levels of poverty, housing disparities, and gender-based violence, especially among Black and Indigenous people. So they serve the Tacoma area, the Seattle area, and a couple of other areas in Washington. They provide legal services to marginalized communities, particularly across the spectrums of gender identity, sexual identity, and obviously they've recently incorporated the statement about making sure that they're race conscious in the way that they do this, and they want to enrich communities of color. So they provide that. They've historically been able to provide some level of housing. They've been able to provide education. They've been able to provide resources, both in terms of like actual like resources that they can use to kind of build up either their skills or survive for a little bit longer, or they've also been able to, in addition to all of that, they've also been able to directly provide lobbying services and the like. So or lobbying and the like. So they have been really fantastic over the past couple of years. They've been doing a great job, and they've grown so much, right? So they've got legal clinics, they've got name change clinics, and so they'll educate people about their legal rights. They'll also provide legal services. So this is so cool. It's so important, and I think that back when we started this, there was so little done for the trans and non-binary community, and I'm really happy that we were able to participate in this. So I just got off the phone. It is their 5th birthday coming up on like the 24th. And so they were able to secure matching donations for people who donate through their Facebook link. So I'll provide that in the show notes. I'll be directing people on Twitter to their Facebook link as part of a Reef Week. It also happens to be kind of my birthday week. I turn whatever age I turn, 32 probably.
I don't recall. I just remember that your median age in the 90s was 7. So.
33. Wow, 33. Okay, well, I got to deal with that. So I turned 33 on the 27th. I've been 32 for a year. Jeez, I feel like I should know that. I should. What do I feel like? I should know that. That's not negotiable. I should know my age, especially when it's like not 90 something.
I'm just letting you talk at this point.
Yeah, that's fine. You're
giving
me the rope to hang myself. I get it.
Yep.
That's good hosting. It's very, very Stugatz. But it's also my birthday week. So for my birthday, for their birthday, for a Reef Week, for whatever reason, if you could donate to the Lavender Rights Project through the Facebook link, again, that'll be in the show notes, and again, I'll be tweeting it out. That would be amazing. The cause is very important to me. I've talked a lot about this on my political work. I just very recently did something with QAnon Anonymous podcast on critical race theory. Obviously, I don't bring a lot of that into, I mean, it bleeds out, but I don't bring a lot of that into this podcast. A couple of occasions where I feel like I can do a lot with it. I am. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited I am that it's officially Reef Week? 10.
Done. All right, next question. Ethan King asks, if Justin Tucker were on the Vikings, would he still be the most accurate kicker ever?
Obviously not. What was Dan Bailey? He was like 3rd or 4th or 5th?
Yep.
He's not anymore.
Dropped like a stone.
Yeah, he's like below 10th.
Yep. Let's go to James Kunau, who asks, for a Reef's Case Cookus corner of cooking quarterbacks, hey, I got that. On a 1 to 10 scale, how case cooking was Kirk Cousins against the Cardinals?
Like an 8? Like, it wasn't like peak Cookus, right? It wasn't like cooking quarterbacks, right? But like, it was pretty good. He didn't average 10 yards an attempt. He didn't have like the dots that you sometimes see with some of his best performances. It's like an 8. No,
dude did very well. Let's go to Delta BC Dad, who asks, what was your favorite announcer moment in the game, and why was it Aqib Talib talking about firing a 9mm?
That was so good. He's just like, Kyler is just popping out like a 9mm.
So what did you think of him? Because he's a bit divisive. Personally, I enjoyed getting a defensive look on things because it seems like every player they bring on for like the player, not the color, but the color commentary stuff, it seems like they are all offense and that's all they want to talk about.
Right. Yeah. And, when it's like Tony Romo or Peyton Manning, I find it like cool and also funny that they're cheering for whoever's on offense. But it is nice to get that defensive perspective. And we're not like completely bereft of it, but it's just like Collinsworth was a receiver. John Madden was an offensive coordinator. Like, we tend to get the offensive perspective. And so sometimes like Booger, right? He was a defensive tackle at LSU. Like, sometimes we get a defensive perspective, but for the most part, it's offensive. I thought it was great. There's a couple of people in the replies that disagreed with me. The reason I liked it is because even though it didn't sound like you're kind of used to hearing from a color commentator and the cadence was a little bit off, and actually his timing was really good. Like, he didn't step over anybody. He didn't step over Gus Johnson, right? So it wasn't that, but it felt like it could have been like that. It felt like it could have interfered with the energy of a broadcast. I didn't think it did that, which I think is really difficult to do if you're doing it kind of in a non-standard way. But I thought he did a really great job of being entertaining, like those quips, but also providing like breakdowns, like him breaking down the cover 3 there, right? I thought that was great. He broke down a little bit of defensive line play. He broke down some linebacker coverage. Like, I thought he did a really good job of saying, hey, defensively, this is what they're trying to do, what they're looking for. I thought he did it efficiently and concisely. Broadcasting is so tough, right? And we love the Manning cast. It's amazing, but like, watching that, you can see why broadcasting is tough. You always have to be saying something, and you have to keep the energy of the game. And that's the downside of the Manning cast, is that it takes you out of the game. It's an amazing watch. I'm watching it every week now, and it keeps you out of the flow of the game. And that's just the nature of it, right? It is a tough skill. And the timelines for your ability to explain things are not like this podcast, right? Like, I'm going a million miles an hour. This podcast is still 2 hours, right? But in a broadcast, you don't have that, right? you have a 40-second clock till you get to the next play, and you don't know sometimes how long those replays are going to be, or if they're going to just cut to a quick snap or something. So you have to concisely explain a complex concept really quickly, and I thought he did a really good job of that.
The last defensive person that I can remember having a prominent role on any form of TV.
John Lynch?
Maybe John Lynch. Remember Tony Siragusa was on Fox a lot, and they canned him because he wasn't
kind of a sideline color guy. Like he was like the third guy in an announcing.
A bit, yeah, but they had him on the ground for a while to just randomly chime in. And when he first started, he was actually not bad. But as years went on, he was on for, I think, 10 years or so.
Yeah.
The last couple of years, you're just kind of sitting there just like, you are not. I really disliked the games that he was on. And he was on a lot of Vikings games.
He was.
He wasn't actually providing anything other than, yep, that looked like a touchdown down here. Like, thanks, Goose.
Yeah.
Thanks for providing that. Ethan King asks, is it time to start Dantzler over Breland?
That's super cop out. A determination that to be made in practice. I thought the Vikings were right to start Breland over Dantzler because in the practices that I saw, in the training camps that I saw, in the preseason games that I saw, Breland was better than Dantzler. Breland did give up that one to Tyreek Hill. Other than that, good in the preseason, good in the joint practices, good in the practices, much better than Dantzler. Here's the thing. Boyd was playing ahead of Dantzler. Now, some of that is because Boyd is a special teamer, Dantzler's kind of not. Obviously, they made him play special teams in this game because they were shorthanded. They didn't have Harrison. That was not meant to be a pun. They didn't have Harrison Hand, so they needed another special teamer, and that was Dantzler, so they made him play some special teams. But they don't like him as a special teamer versus Boyd, who's a really good gunner. So that's part of it, right? But part of it is that they were clearly indicating that I thought Boyd was playing better than him. So I don't know that this one game, which was really good, great game from Dantzler, is enough to make that determination. If Dantzler's having a good practice, go for it. Like, what have you got to lose? A performance like Breland? Like, okay, fine. Like, that's the downside, is what we already have on the field. So I think it's there, but I think you need to see it in practice this week, which we don't get access to anymore.
Yeah, Breland looked like he was injured half the time, and Dalvin Cook looked like he was just fighting through as many injuries as he possibly could.
Yeah, and that's a thing I should have added to the second half analysis of Dalvin Cook, because it's not necessarily that the blocking was there. He did not look like he could explode out of his cuts.
No, and when they finally brought out Madison, it wasn't for very long because it was right back to Dalvin. Like, you're really going to kill Dalvin for a week 2 victory? Really? That's where we're at? Michael Lacoste asks, Zarif's thoughts on the defensive performance and the takes on adjustments we might see moving forward. D-line and DBs in particular as compared to week 1.
Yeah, I thought the defensive line played really well. I covered that a little bit in the summary of the game, but I thought they were better. I don't think the defensive line was bad. That's the whole reason I wrote that piece on the defensive line, which went up like Thursday evening. So I don't think a lot of people ended up reading it, which is unfortunate because I really liked that piece. But yeah, I thought the defensive line did well against the Bengals. I thought they did really well against the Cardinals. I don't really have a good sense of what adjustments they made defensively quite yet. I'll be taking a look at that as the week goes on. But for the most part, yeah, good stuff. Obviously, a better performance from Danielle Hunter. Love to see it. Defensive backs, Harrison Smith played well. Xavier Woods played really well. Patrick Peterson, we already discussed a little bit. Breland, we discussed a little bit. Dantzler played really well, so that was nice to see. But yeah, the Nick Vigil thing is the most confusing one. I don't know how I concisely do it. He was very up and down.
All right, next question is going to be from Jacob Kost, who asks, what would you say has been the flaw in the regime that has plagued the Zimmer-Spielman era the most? Is it the clock management woes or the spotty track record when it comes to drafting starter-quality offensive line talent? I'll include here the ability to win against teams that are over 500.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, right? And how do you kind of dial that into something more actionable, right? Like, okay, win more, right? I think actually that the offensive line thing relates to all of those, because I think if you've got a higher quality offensive line, you're going to produce more, right? And so you don't need to manage the clock against bad teams. You'll win those games, right? You don't need to worry about your close, because your winning record or winning games record, right? Like, you can do a better job in those games. Like, it feels like the only team with a winning record they can consistently beat is the Saints, right? That's weird.
And typically just in the playoffs.
Yeah, and just in the playoffs or a play-in game, right? Like a week 7. Yeah, that's it, right? Week 9, you're out. You're done. Sorry. I guess they got him week 1, right? Like a couple years ago.
Week 1 or the very end of the season.
Yeah. You can bookend the Saints. You can't get them in the middle of the sandwich. There's like a couple of middle of the season. Yeah, those were rough. Alvin Kamara was what, week 15, week 16?
Yeah, it was Christmas. It was the Christmas game last year.
Yeah. So that was not a literal bookend, so it qualifies as the meat of the sandwich. But yeah, a better offensive line, I think, resolves some of these problems. Again, I want to refer to, I don't know if it was an Adam Harstad tweet, but I know it was from him. The things that we see are probably the least important, but they're the most easily identifiable, so we say they're the most important. I think that applies to clock management. It is one of the least important coaching skills, because the better you are at every other coaching skill, the less that one matters. But it is very visible. The failure is very obvious. We can diagnose them. We can dissect them. We don't know very much about the locker room environment. We don't know very much about in-game adjustments. We don't know very much about their ability to coach up new techniques. Those are all more important. So I don't think it's the clock management woes. I have my issues with them. I just had like a 10-minute rant on them above. But I think the offensive line talent is a bigger issue.
All right, next question is going to be from Bridgeboy, who asks, is there a scenario in which the Vikings hire a new offensive coordinator to replace Zim and the defense doesn't tank next year? If so, is there somebody, this is supposed to be DC, I imagine, instead of offensive coordinator. Is there a young defensive coordinator to replace Zim and the defense doesn't tank next year? If so, who do we see as a viable defensive coordinator?
Yeah, I think in that scenario, it's tough, right? Because it's a good defense. So if you could say, hey, maybe Andre Patterson could be the defensive coordinator, maybe, I don't know, but you tend to kind of clean staff, right? You tend to clean out with a new coach. What some teams are doing is what they did with Sean McVay a bit ago. It's like, if you've had a cup of coffee with Vic Fangio or Brandon Staley, now you're a defensive coordinator. The Packers are suffering from that philosophy, right? I mean, offensively, they're doing well with their Shanahan guy. Defensively, right now, they're doing really poorly with their Staley guy. But I think that's probably where people will look. I'm fine with that. Just kind of be careful when teams tried to hire out the cover 3 stuff from Seattle. It didn't work. Like the Gus Bradley and the Dan Quinns and so on, it didn't work. Only Robert Saleh worked, and that's because he didn't want to install the same cover 3. So yeah, I would have to do a deeper dive into the defensive talent that's out there, but Brandon Staley kind of came up out of nowhere, and that might be what you have to do. I don't know that there's a ton of available defensive minds that are going to be easy to identify as good and also like make sense as a new hire as a defensive coordinator, not like a head coach.
Kenneth Allen asks, why does Kendricks' helmet come off so often? I think twice in week 1 and once in week 2. It's often enough that it's become noticeable.
Yeah, the beat has actually noticed that too. Like they bring it up sometimes in the press box when it happens, so it's very clearly noticeable. I don't know. I feel like if it was a chin strap problem, it would have been solved by now. So I don't have an answer for you.
Also from Kenneth Allen, we saw a lot of second and long runs again. Many fans blame Zimmer for these. Is that fair? Presumably the offensive game plan is up to Kubiak, so isn't he to blame? Or is it that Zim mandates a run-first team, and so even if Kubiak has control over the plays, we end up with these bad decisions?
So if you look at what Kevin Stefanski is doing in Cleveland, you see a lot of the same stuff. So you might think, oh, that's just the offensive philosophy. Now, mind you, Zimmer has control over that through hiring practice. So even if he doesn't interfere with the offensive coordinator at all, even in that world, he is controlling the hiring process, and he wants those guys. So he hires those guys. So Zim still deserves some responsibility for it, right? And if he doesn't like it, and these are somewhat significant, it happens a lot, right? If he doesn't like it, then he can tell them to cut it out, right? So it's still up to him, right? But if we wanted to entertain the notion that the offensive coordinators are or are not independent, we can look at a couple of things like Stefanski. But also, if you take a look at Gary Kubiak in his history, we don't know anything about Clint, right? If you look at Gary Kubiak's history, he didn't do that with Houston. Like, they were like the 8th most pass-heavy team, even though they were a play-action team. So that to me, and his interaction with DiFilippo, who was a super pass first coordinator, and how he kept essentially negging him in the media, tells me that Zimmer is exerting as much influence as he can while trying to appear independent, but still trying to get them to run the ball as often as they can, which includes second and long. And if you're an offensive coordinator that has a mandate to run the ball and you throw the ball in 1st and 10 and it's incomplete, you're probably going to run the ball the next play.
Professor Poop asks, as I've said before, I like Zimmer and I find him to be very much not poopy coach. That said, it is a very realistic possibility that he may be in his final year with us. I think that the Wilfs let him play out the season, but when is the earliest you could see him being let go? Obviously, I like Zimmer, so I don't want this to happen, but a 20-point blowout by Stefanski and the Browns is something I could see them seeing the actual end. Very Vikings and obviously very interesting for me, given the team in question.
Right. Very, very Professor Poop related question. I would say the earliest is week 4. 0-4, I think that's it. Right. It would be tough to justify keeping Zimmer on. The problem is, I don't there's not a ton of value to me in firing a coach mid-season. You get to see the interim guy, but the interim guy is usually overperforming. The history of interim coaches is really bad. If they do well as the interim coach, it only makes sense to hire them, and then they do poorly. The history is pretty long. Obviously, everybody remembers Leslie Frazier. That's a good example. But historically, in both college and in the NFL, for whatever reason, these interim coaches the internal interim hire doesn't seem to work out. Now, mind you, if they did that with Stefanski, if they had done that with Mike Tomlin, if they had done that with Pete Carroll, maybe that would have worked out. Maybe there were different people then. But for the most part, it doesn't. So I don't know that there's a ton of value in it. Maybe you promote Andre Patterson, who's the co-head coach, and you can see what he has. But I think that opinion aside, I think that you'll probably see it after an 0-4 start, especially by Stefanski.
Next question is going to be from Tommy Gunn, who asks, with the switch to a 17-game season and the addition of a 7th seed, what will this do to the odds of 0-2 teams making the playoffs? But more importantly, what are the chances the Vikings pull it off only to get embarrassed in a slime-covered Nickelodeon broadcast?
I absolutely need an MVP on the team. Mitch Trubisky year 1, could be Kirk Cousins year 2, right? But dude, if it's Rashad Hill, that's funny as hell. If it's Bashad Breeland, that's so funny. I would love to see an MVP. So that would be cool. I hope you get that. My guess is the odds are low. But yeah, as for the 17-game season switch, I covered that a little bit in my article. One thing I don't bring up is that it's a 6% increase in the odds, or a 6% increase in the number of games. So it is a substantial-ish increase, but it doesn't diminish all that much the importance of 0-2 or whatever, right? So in the 14-game format, about 11.1% of teams would have made the playoffs over the past 10 years, right? So if you add another game, let's say some of those teams get a half wins or something like that, the number of teams that adds, I go into that a little bit, it's not enormous, right? I think that the problem is that when you look at 0-2 teams, there's essentially 3 buckets, right? There's 0-2 teams that are secretly quite good. There's not very many of those. I don't even know if the Vikings are in that group, but that's a small sample, but that's part of the sample, right? I think the Seahawks one year were one of those teams. Pittsburgh was kind of one of those teams because they were playing Duck Hodges, but Roethlisberger wasn't great that year. But that's something to keep in mind. Then there's the secretly average to above average teams. That's where I think the Vikings are. And then there's a bunch of bad teams, because if you're bad, you're much more likely to go 0-2 than any other, right? And if you parse that out, if you get rid of all the teams that are obviously bad, those odds go up way beyond 11%. If you think the Vikings are above average as a team, which I do, then 11% aren't the true odds. If you take a look at some of the sites that project this out there, that are closer to 33%, that's still more likely to miss the playoffs than make it, but it's still very much worth keeping on track and paying attention to. The addition of a 17-game season does get played out in a lot of these playoff projectors, so that's nice. So that 33% or 36 or 34, depending on which one you're looking at, that gives you a little bit more to go off of. But for the most part, like, you're increasing the number of games by 6%. It is significant, but not enormous.
Next question is going to be from Don from Ohio, who asks, which one of you guys sabotaged my trip? I knew you and James were jealous of Dusty being my best man. This all makes sense now. I wouldn't be shocked if you had me arrested in LA too.
Dusty's not your best. We know Dusty's not your best man because the reason we know he's alive is because he's in your basement.
Well, more to the fact, why is he going somewhere? Wait, it says best man. Is he getting married? I feel like he would tell us if he was getting married.
He would have told us if he was getting married. That's a good point.
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard him talk about marriage or trips or anything. So I'm supposed to be in Cleveland.
Must be a ruse.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be in Cleveland this week, but my concert got canceled. So I have no idea what he's doing in Hawaii. And finally, let's go to Ricardo, who asks, Dear Sirs, when I sent the first Parenting Corner email, I thought it would be amusing to ask someone with many opinions but no kids partying advice. While this has been true to an exceptional degree, I feel like my reasoning was flawed. While Arif has no human children that he is aware of, I feel I neglected his other offspring. I speak, of course, of the consensus board. Based on comments in the show and various articles, it certainly seems to have a similar place in Arif's heart and takes a similar amount of time and effort. For this oversight, I apologize. That being said, now the question. With his little one growing up and gaining prominence in the world, what is Arif's worst fear for his child's use? Being used by Skip Bayless to prove a point? Being liked in a tweet by Wentz? Bringing an improperly formatted spreadsheet home for dinner?
All right, the spreadsheet one, not an issue. We've all been there. That's, kind of you kind of need to work on it yourself. The consensus board started out as an improperly formatted spreadsheet. So I can't really judge if here in this, I guess it's not even a metaphor. In this scenario, the consensus board brings home a date that is also a spreadsheet, right? Like, that's what I'm working with.
Yes, but presumably one that enjoys turkey.
We didn't. You didn't have to. That's not necessarily part of the improperly formatted. If it likes turkey, we're done, right? I am
dead to me.
Yeah. So that probably answers the question, right? Because being used by Skip Bayless to prove a point, you can't do anything about how other people decide to use you. At least in that fashion, you can fight back, but you can't prevent that from happening in the first place. Being liked in a tweet by Wentz, same thing, right? The consensus board demonstrated that other people did like Carson Wentz, not as much as high as he was drafted, right? So in that sense, the consensus board was low on him, but they did demonstrate that people generally thought he was a good quarterback. That's not the consensus board's fault. He's just a messenger, right? So that's not the issue. The issue are the choices that they make, not like the ways that other people interact with them. So the turkey thing, that's the answer.
The turkey is the end. It's the beginning and the end, but I suppose you already knew that, didn't you?
God, I mean, this question was going well until you brought up the turkey.
I suppose. All right, that's going to be the end of this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back later this week with a special guest to talk all about the upcoming matchup with the Seahawks in Minnesota, which rarely happens for some reason. Though they seem to play the Seahawks every year, so go them. And also check out the Draw Play on thedrawplay.com. And let's go to Arif. Arif, what do you have to plug? You had mentioned earlier about an article involving the playoffs.
Yep, so we're going to go over the Vikings and how they place among 0-2 teams and what that means for their playoff odds, whether or not it makes sense to invest in them. That's going up. I'm also going to do a piece on if the Vikings are a play-action team anymore. We'll see. That's going to be later this week. And then, again, I wanted to plug the Lavender Rights Project. They do really great work. I've been able to talk to them about some of the work that they've done. I've been able to receive, like cards from people who have been impacted by the work that they do. It's like overwhelming how great it is. So check them out again. That link is going to go up on my Twitter. It's going to go up on the show notes over at the Daily Norseman. That's my main plug this week.
All right, so thank you guys so much for listening. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. For Reef, my name is James, and please remember, always, case cookus. And we will be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.